From the blood feud between Quinton Rampage Jackson and Jon Jones to Khabib Nurmagomedov's slap that triggered Conor McGregor, here are all the fighters who've held grudges against other fighters. I have to start with possibly the most heated rivalry the world of MMA has ever seen. Yes, I'm talking about the feud between Quinton Jackson and Jon Jones. Rampage was a real character, known for his loud and larger-than-life personality, which often rubbed his opponents the wrong way. See, back in the day, Rampage had some serious beef with fighters like Rashad Evans and Wanderlei Silva, resulting in some pretty heated clashes. But here's the funny part, once the fights were done, Rampage has seemingly let go of the bad blood. But there's one fighter who still gets under his skin, and that's none other than Jon Jones, the former light heavyweight champ. The showdown between the two happened back in 2011 at UFC 135, and Jones got the better of Rampage with a fourth-round submission. But it wasn't just the loss that irked Rampage, it was the sneaky tactics Jones used. The worst one was his infamous oblique kick that wrecked Rampage's knee. Ouch, that's gotta hurt. And get this, after all these years, Rampage isn't over it. In 2021, he straight up called Jones the dirtiest fighter in UFC history. He called him out for those oblique kicks and even for poking people in the eyes. Talk about a long-lasting beef, huh? According to Rampage, the UFC had to change their rules to deal with Jones's tricks. They outlawed reaching forward with an open hand because of him. Now, whether these claims are totally true is up in the air, but one thing's for sure, Rampage's dislike for Jones is as fiery as ever. The drama in the octagon is real, you guys. I mean, just look at the rivalry between Nick Diaz and Georges St-Pierre. This is a feud that's lasted for years. Let's break it down. The tension between the two fighters reached its boiling point at UFC 158, and let me tell you, it was a huge deal. The event drew one of the highest pay-per-view buy rates in UFC history. No surprises there, considering how much these two seemed to despise each other. So of course, the world wanted to watch them rumble. GSP, the former welterweight champ, had this clean-cut, respectful reputation that got on Nick Diaz's nerves. Diaz was convinced that GSP's nice guy image was all an act, and it irked him big time. When St-Pierre defeated Diaz by unanimous decision, you'd think that would be the end of it. But nope, the war continued with Diaz leading the charge. I mean, these guys just can't stop sniping at each other. Months after the fight, Diaz claimed that GSP cheated at UFC 158 by not making weight officially and using performance-enhancing drugs. But hey, those allegations were never proven. And guess what? Diaz has stuck to that story ever since. In 2019, when St-Pierre retired from MMA, Diaz called him a cheat once again. He even said that the Canadian fought like a in their clash. Yikes. On the other hand, St-Pierre has been more respectful in his comments. In 2020, he mentioned that Diaz could still be a UFC champion if he made a full-time comeback. But here's the kicker. St-Pierre also admitted that he never made peace with Diaz, hinting that he might still hold a grudge of sorts against his old rival. I guess burying the hatchet just isn't a thing in the UFC. The grudges seem to go on forever, like the one between Michael Bisping and Vitor Belfort, which kicked off at UFC on FX7. Man, Bisping was known for stirring up some serious drama even with the more mild-mannered fighters. He really knew how to get under their skin, and became quite the villain during his prime. But here's the interesting part. Once the fights were over, Bisping would usually make peace with his rivals. I mean, look at Luke Rockhold. These two had a bitter rivalry that spanned 2 fights, yet they were recently spotted training together. It's like the bad blood just vanished into thin air. But there's one opponent that Bisping has never let go of, and that's Vitor Belfort. Back in January 2013, Belfort knocked Bisping out in a UFC headliner with a devastating head kick. That kick not only ended the fight but also wrecked Bisping's career. It caused a serious eye injury that still affects him to this day. Ouch. To make matters worse, Bisping has always claimed that Belfort was cheating during the fight. He accused him of using testosterone replacement therapy. And guess what? A few years ago, the grudge resurfaced. When Bisping spoke out about Belfort's upcoming boxing match against the legendary Evander Holyfield, Bisping said he hopes Evander batters him. He even went as far as calling Belfort a piece of So it's clear that he still holds a deep grudge and enjoys seeing Belfort face some rough times. Talk about holding on tight to that anger. And while we're on UFC feuds that never got resolved, let's discuss Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. These two fighters have a long history that goes way back to their kickboxing days. Their first encounter was super intense and could have gone either way, but Pereira managed to scrape by with a close decision win. But wait, Adesanya didn't agree with that decision at all. He contested it, believing he was robbed. The drama. Then came their second showdown, and oh boy, it ended decisively. Pereira landed a brutal knockout that left Adesanya grasping for air. Like seriously, he needed an oxygen mask. After their kickboxing battles though, Adesanya transitioned into MMA and achieved great success in the UFC. But he couldn't let go of the fact that Pereira's greatest accomplishment, according to him, was beating him in kickboxing. Adesanya even said Pereira would spend his twilight years at a bar bragging about defeating someone more successful. Ouch. This whole situation prompted Pereira to step into the MMA world, and guess what? He eventually earned a shot at Adesanya's middleweight throne. It was a back-and-forth battle, but Pereira pulled off a fifth-round TKO to dethrone his longtime rival. But you know what's interesting? Right after the loss, Adesanya demanded a rematch. The two headlined at UFC 287, and Adesanya got his redemption. He won through a TKO, leveling the playing field once again. The rivalry remains unresolved, and now we're all wondering who will make the next move to settle this beef once and for all. Now let's move on to the women, who have some crazy feuds of their own. Take Ronda Rousey and Chris Cyborg, for example. These two fierce fighters will never settle their differences in the cage, because Rousey left MMA for the wild world of pro wrestling with WWE, while Cyborg is currently kicking ass in Bellator's women's featherweight division. Their history is a roller coaster ride of contention. Rousey started as a featherweight, but made her mark as a dominant bantamweight. Interestingly, they were both in Strikeforce, but their paths never crossed. Cyborg reigned supreme at 145 pounds, while Rousey conquered at 135 pounds. Did you know that Cyborg accused Rousey of running away from her? Talk about throwing shade. Rousey hit back, calling out Cyborg for her past performance-enhancing drug use and even questioning her womanhood. She constantly challenged Cyborg to drop down to 135 pounds, but it just didn't happen. Sadly, their epic showdown never materialized. Rousey retired after tough losses to Holly Holm and Amanda Nunes, and the grudge match never took place. The tension between Rousey and Cyborg was sky high, and their trash-talking game was on fire. While they'll never settle it in the cage, their rivalry remains one of the most interesting and unresolved in the world of MMA. Who knows if they'll ever bury the hatchet? Only time will tell. I'll leave you with one final rivalry between possibly the best fighters the world has ever seen. You guessed it, I'm talking about Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Between 2017 and 2018, all the talk in the UFC lightweight division was about these two fighters. McGregor's former friend and teammate, Artem Lobov, he was also asked about his thoughts on a potential matchup between the two, and he didn't hold back. He called Nurmagomedov a coward who ducks out of a fight at the slightest hint of an injury. Ouch. Obviously, that Khabib off. Just before UFC 223, the Eagle confronted Lobov at the Fighter Hotel and gave him a good slap. That's when things escalated real quick. McGregor flew all the way to New York and attacked a bus that Nurmagomedov was on. Wild, right? Their feud culminated in a showdown at UFC 229. McGregor unleashed his trademark trash talk, but when they stepped into the octagon, Nurmagomedov got the last laugh with a fourth-round submission victory. But wait, there's more. Nurmagomedov jumped out of the octagon and attacked McGregor's corner, and it was chaos. Since then, McGregor has been campaigning for a rematch, stooping as low as mocking Nurmagomedov's father's death. Nurmagomedov has mostly brushed off McGregor's antics, calling him a desperate attention seeker. The grudge between these two is as fiery as it gets. Will we ever see a rematch? Only time will tell. Well, there you have it. From the slap that triggered Conor McGregor to the blood feud between Quinton Rampage Jackson and Jon Jones, these were fighters who held grudges against other fighters.